Hello, this is Malorian, and this is Orc Tactical Team. And what we're going to be talking about today is tactical terrain. So a lot of people, when you ask them, like, oh, how'd the game go? First thing they're going to talk about is how they deployed, or they might even go all the way straight to what happened in the first turn. But really, what happens in the game and the real tactics behind it start even before that. And it starts, let's go back to where you're even putting terrain down. And so that what we're going to be talking about today is just the tactics of the way that you place terrain. Now, some people don't always do it by the book. It says in the rule book that there's many ways you could do it. It suggests one, but you don't have to do it that way. Some people just throw things down and that's what they do, or a third party puts down terrain. I'm not going to be dealing with that because it's all random, right? People are just throwing things down. You have no control over it, so there's no tactics to it. Just tactics in a way of using it after. So if you are doing it by the book, the way that it goes is that you roll off. The winner puts down one piece, then the next person puts down a piece, and then after that, people go back and forth until one person says that nope, that's it, I don't want to do anymore, and then the other person can put one more piece down, meaning that at all times you should be able to put down at least two pieces. So some of the things you might be thinking about when you are putting down these pieces of terrain is what pieces of terrain could help you. Like obviously if you have a lot of war machines, you might want to do hills, and so for your two pieces you'll make sure that there's a hill on one side and there's a hill on the other side, right? Simple stuff like that. But unfortunately it's not always that simple, because you're not the only player. Obviously your opponent has things too, and so you have to start keeping in mind what that terrain might do for him, because you never know at that point when you're placing terrain who's going to be getting what side, and you could place this perfect hill right in the center and all of a sudden it's going to be used for his war machines, right? So you have to keep that all in mind. So with that, it could also be that he's placing hills and you don't want him to, right? You want to stop him because you don't want to have him have this great line of sight with his shooters. There's a few things you could do, and one of them is that when they put down that piece of hill there in order to set up for their war machines, you next, for your next step, take a piece of woods and you put it somewhere in front so that it's going to block line of sight, so that you have ways of sneaking up. Or another way of doing it is just kind of moving it right up to the hill, so there's even encapsulating the hill but a little bit past deployment, so that no matter what, if they go on that hill whatsoever, they're going to be blocked line of sight by this huge woods right in front. Some other things you could be doing with this is, let's say you're an elite army against a horde and you just don't want to get flanked. Well, what you could do is, you can't have anything in center, everything has to be at least a foot away from center, but if you put a big piece of terrain on one side and then another big piece of terrain on the other side, all a foot from the center, you're forcing them to funnel through, and then all of a sudden your elite army only has to deal with so much at the same time and can use those pieces of terrain to guard their flanks. I mean, things can sweep around the flanks, but it's going to take them time, you can march block them, and it's not really that big of a deal. So that's a big thing you can do there against swarms. Another thing you can do, and that people have used against me, is that if you're against an army with low leadership, a big thing they're going to want to do is have their general to have the bubble with everybody. So what you do, you just throw big pieces of terrain in the center parts of their deployment zone, so that all of a sudden it's forcing their lines to break apart, and obviously break apart that leadership bubble. I had one opponent that I just, every time I face them, I just know there's going to be a big swamp in the middle of my deployment. It's just, that's the way it's going to be. Another thing you can do is that people don't use a lot is linear terrain. Let's say you are up against a very combat heavy army. I mean, you can have combat elements yourself, but obviously the army you're against is really combat heavy. Well, what you can do is, you can't put anything, as I said, within a foot of center, but on one side or even both sides you can put that linear terrain right across the very front edge of the deployment zone, right in the center. And what that's going to do is that it doesn't matter who gets that side. Because if you think about it, if you get that side, great, I got this linear terrain that I can use to defend myself, take away his charge bonuses. But if it's on his side, if he takes that side, then all of a sudden he's going to have to either go around it or be slowed down, so you can really break up his formations. It's almost the same way as how you could slow down a horde as well, just throwing that on that linear terrain. Other things you can do is, if you want to have good places for scouts, you can't always put it in their deployment zone because a wise opponent will just throw units in there to block it. But if you stick that woods just outside their deployment zone, knowing that they can't fill it up, all of a sudden you have guaranteed spots where your scouts can go and start to march block. And of course, because of the 1 foot from the center, it does have to be on the flanks, but that's still something you can do. Another good thing to keep in mind when you're placing terrain is that you're not always placing terrain because you think it's going to be good for you or bad for your opponent. Sometimes you just want to get terrain placed so it can't be somewhere else. Like, let's say in your group you only have one really great piece of hill, right, that your opponent's going to love to have, and you don't really want it on either side because it's going to be a 50-50, and of course if he gets this hill then he's going to castle and you're in trouble. So if on your turn you take that hill and just kind of put it on the sideboard, all of a sudden it's useless. So you've kind of neutralized that piece of terrain and you don't need to worry about it anymore. When you're doing these things, obviously there's a lot of sneaky things you can do, and it can even get out of control, especially when people are kind of blocking things in, that you can just go back and forth and all of a sudden you just got terrain everywhere and all you really have is a bubble in the center. And the main thing you want to remember with this is like I talked about before, is the whole being a bastard thing, and that at some point it can get to the point where you're just kind of ruining the game before it even starts. Like I was saying, where I used to always have swamps in the center of my deployment, right? It's like, oh, here we go, I'm all of a sudden decide to go and deploy in swampland again, right? Oh geez, a woods is in front of my hill again every single time. So you have to be kind of careful with this. If you are playing a competitive game, go ahead and use these tactics to your advantage. But there's still lots of fun to be had with just random terrain or terrain to be looking like a city or a little town or whatever, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. So just kind of to quickly sum it up again, the game does not start when you start deployment. The game starts when you start doing your terrain. Think about what's going to help you, what's going to help your opponent, and weigh the risks of not knowing who's going to get one side. And finally, don't go too far with it, because you can start a nasty tone, negative tone, before the game even begins. So that's today's little podcast. And next time what we're going to be talking about is how the game starts even before the terrain, and that's going to be with the metagame. So that should be interesting, and I hope to see you then. Bye.